Hi and welcome to this latest 10x Leadership video. I've updated my microphone, so hopefully the sound's a bit better this week. Apologies for the last couple of weeks. Last week we had a look at modern leadership, so it was the start of a new series and I'm just going to carry on with that series. So just a reminder, this is episode 36 about adaptability. I'm just going to go back and just do a quick recap of how we got here in terms of this modern leadership series. So back in episode 35 we talked about what modern leadership is, and that was really made up of three components: adaptability, leveraging technology and inclusivity. And that's to navigate rapidly changing environments. So just keeping pace with change. So this week I'm going to cover off the adaptability piece, and within adaptability there are three elements. There's adaptability and resilience, and that's what we're going to cover off in this video today. There's continuous learning growth mindset, and there's future oriented vision. So the second one has already been covered off in episode 31. So if you haven't already seen that, it's worth going and having a look. That's successful leaders have a growth mindset. So that tells you what growth mindset is, why it's important, how you can have a growth mindset if you haven't already got one, how you can help your team, and all the benefits you'll get from a growth mindset. We'll cover off future-oriented vision in the next video. So today we're going to cover off adaptability and resilience. And for some of you, it won't have escaped your notice that there's a finch on the left-hand side, and I put the phrase there, like finches, we need to adapt to our environment. I mean, it's true of every species, isn't it, that we need to evolve, we need to keep pace and adapt to our surroundings. And it's finches that Darwin was observing and realised they had different beaks that had adapted to their own specific environments all around the world. We've talked about, in terms of leadership and a leadership approach, a leadership style, we've talked about adapting to the situation, the environment in episode 5 as well. So again, if you haven't already seen that, it's worth going and having a look. It's called This is the Absolute Best Leadership Style, and I still believe that it is. So if you haven't seen that already, go and have a look at that one. Adaptability and resilience is about understanding the situation that you and your team are in, and, funny old thing, adapting to that and doing something about it. So I've been having to think about what is it that I do and I have been doing for the last 35 years or so to ensure that I adapt and I'm resilient, and that's just what I'm going to talk about today. And really I think the most important message I can give, this is primarily about adaptability, but actually it also helps with resilience as well, and the two are intrinsically tied together. It's about understanding first principles, and I'll just talk you through what I mean by that. So again, there are three parts to first principles. The first is sort of identifying and understanding the core truths of a situation. The second one is building from fundamentals, so building on those core truths. And then the third one is about challenging assumptions. And I'm just going to go through each of those so that you understand what I mean by each of those items. So the first one, identifying core truths. This is about stripping away assumptions and digging into the fundamental elements of any given challenge or goal. So really understanding the truth about what you're doing, or what the activity is. So you might have thought to yourself at times, how can we improve our meeting structure, for example? Really thinking about it from a first principles perspective turns that into, well, why do we hold meetings at all, and what purpose do they serve? And again, you'll have heard me say quite a few times in the last 35 videos or so about what's the point. In fact, I think that was the very first video. That really is it's first principles in practice there. Why do we even do those things? Because if we don't even understand that, there's not really any point. And, in this case, meetings exist to share information, make decisions, and foster collaboration. That's the sort of first principle of meetings. And once we understand that then helps us realise that, the format or the way we're delivering that meeting or we're holding that meeting might be irrelevant. So, a good example would be during COVID, where all of a sudden, we were all having to have remote meetings. Anyone who'd certainly working in IT, we'd been doing it for some time, but there was quite a lot of resistance in general business to having remote meetings and having people work remotely. And when it came to meetings, lots of people were saying, well, you can't do inductions, you can't connect with people remotely. And when you stop and think about what is the purpose of a meeting, as we can see there, the format often is absolutely irrelevant. And what happens then is you do away with one of the objections, or at least some of the objections, to doing things differently. And in the COVID situation, we didn't have any choice anyway, but people very quickly adapted to how do we keep the business going whilst we're all working remotely. And, for some leaders, especially those who like to control and like to micromanage, that was a really difficult thing to do. But had they realised the purpose of leadership, the purpose of meetings in this case, they'd have realised that, it didn't really matter what format the meeting was in, it was still going to work. You might have had to put a bit more effort in, you might have had to think about it a bit harder about how to, create that sense of belonging to the team. But the format really is irrelevant because, as I say, the purpose of a meeting is to share information, make decisions, and foster collaboration. So, it's about the fundamentals, it's about the foundations that, you build on. And that's what the next part's about. So the graphic in the background there, that looks like the foundations for some sort of bridge that's being built. If you don't get those right, you don't understand the environment, the ground that they're built on, you won't have created them in the right way, and things won't work as they should. So in terms of building from fundamentals, I suppose building on that first point, what are we here to do or achieve? So, you as a leader, your team, the organisation or company that you work for, what are we here to do and what are we here to achieve? And given that this is about how to adapt, we must be overcoming some sort of change, or some sort of change must be taking place that we need to adapt to. So what does that change mean in terms of the goal that you're trying to achieve? And it might be that it has absolutely no bearing on that goal at all, in which case you don't need to worry about it. But it might be that it has an impact, and what you need to work out as a team is how do you need to adapt to ensure you can still deliver that goal even in that new set of circumstances. And really, as you've seen in some of the other videos as well, for me, the way that you do that is you try some things, you test some things, you probably fail, or at least you don't make the progress that you thought you were going to make. You tweak and adjust, you learn from the failures, you go again. And you keep building on the fundamentals, which are, what's the sort of first principle, what's the point of what you're doing. And once you know that, you know where you're heading, and you know whether you need to change or not. The third element then is about challenging assumptions. So, assumptions are a shortcut to, I suppose, stop us having to think about every single thing. We just sort of take things for granted. But often assumptions are built on assumptions. And what that does is it masks the truth, which was, the very first point. So what we need to be doing is challenging positively everything that we think we know. And what I do with my teams is, once we've actually established some facts, and again there's a video that I've done already about the fact assumption or myth game, about trying to get to the truth. Once you've got to the truth, or at least what you think is the truth, what we do in my teams is we document that, and that's a sort of, again, a foundational building block that we can build on. So instead of thinking something's true and then finding out later that it's not, we find out the facts, we collect those up, we understand what they are. We might still need to make some assumptions, because sometimes you haven't got all the data and information you need, but at least then we can document those assumptions and know which bits were the variable bits and which bits are the sort of fixed facts. So challenge positively everything you think you know. And remember again that even things that seem to be true now may not be true in the future. And the other thing is and I've mentioned this a few times as well, is when you're trying to work out what the solution is, look for the right answer or right answers. There might be a number of options that you can use, but look for what is the right answer to solve the problem, to adapt and deliver your goal, and ignore the assumed constraints at this point. And the reason I say that is because there will be there are likely to be constraints, but if you constrain before you even come up with a solution, some of those assumptions might not be true at all, and you might be going off course before you even need to. So think about what the right answer is, and then add in any actual constraints you have after that, and adjust and adapt the solution based on those actual constraints. So, like I say, don't bake constraints in at the start, because they may not be true. And it also constrains your thinking, it constrains your the innovation and the options you have for solving the problem, and in this case adapting your solution. So really, in terms of adapting, those are the sort of key messages. But what I wanted to do was just talk you through a couple of examples of where companies have used first principles to really understand what the problem was and then adapt to it. So let me just talk you through a couple of examples, and then we'll go on to the resilience piece. So the first one, as you can probably tell from the background, is Spotify. And the challenge there really was the music industry was losing revenue, and depending on who you listen to, it was due to piracy. Consumers were dissatisfied with traditional album purchasing. Sometimes they didn't want the whole album, they just wanted certain tracks. You couldn't really do that. And the traditional approach or assumption or solution or adaptation in this case would be just to fight piracy and to put even more stricter copyright enforcement in place, and I suppose penalise people who were breaching copyright. The other thing they were doing was, the traditional music industry was carrying on trying to just sell more physical and digital albums. They weren't thinking differently, they were just doing the same thing they'd always done. But if you look at that problem, as Spotify did with first principle thinking, they asked themselves a question, well, why do people pirate music? And the answer they came up with was that they wanted instant access to a wide range of music at low cost. And they also asked, well, what do the consumers of music truly value? And that was convenience, affordability, and a personalised experience. And as a result of that, Spotify and lots of other streaming services came about, and of course have just revolutionised the music industry. So by understanding the first principles, they were able to tackle the root cause problem and come up with some real solutions to meet the need of, in this case, the customers. And of course, that doesn't mean it was easy to do. The music industry really didn't want it. I don't think the artists really wanted it either. They didn't understand how that would enable them to make any money. And, if they weren't going to make money, what was the point in doing it? I did a bit of research this morning just to look at, Spotify top artists, and Taylor Swift is the top artist. And, despite the assumed constraints, which was, that nobody will ever make any money from streaming, Taylor Swift has tens of billions of streams, for all of the content that she's got on Spotify, and from that is making hundreds of millions of pounds. So, that assumed constraint that they weren't going to make any money, clearly isn't true. It doesn't, not everyone's Taylor Swift, of course, but, it just illustrates that we often think there are constraints when they don't exist. The second example is Uber. So with Uber, the challenge really was people struggling with inefficient taxi systems and services. Often there were long wait times. Sometimes they're unavailable. If they're at taxi ranks, then it was again long queues, and quite often it was poor service and expensive. And the traditional approach or assumption to fixing that would have been increasing the existing fleets or revising regulations, or to come up with alternatives. So expand the public transport system instead to overcome the problem. But again, using first principle thinking, that was, the question that was asked was, what's transportation fundamentally about? And of course, it's just getting people from A to B conveniently, affordably, and safely. Now, I know that Uber's had some issues about some of the drivers and the safety. So I'm not condoning that. I'm not suggesting that Uber is the safest service. But it certainly solves, in the majority of cases, it solves the convenience and the affordability and largely the safety issue. But, unregulated drivers was perhaps, the thing that didn't necessarily help here. And the other thing they asked was what causes inefficiencies in taxis, and that was centralised dispatching systems. Depends how far you go back, but not that long ago it was people on switchboards that you'd ring up for a taxi. They would then get in touch with the taxi drivers over radio and get them to come and visit. Inconsistent quality, and again limited supply during peak hours. There are only so many cars on the road. So instead, Uber created the app, and basically all they're doing is, they're the marketplace really between somebody who wants to travel and somebody who's got a car, and they have some time to be able to take somebody in their own vehicle from A to B. The app is fantastic, whether it's Uber or any of the other services. You can see where they are, they can see how long they're going to be, you understand the cost, you can pay for it ahead of time, you can tip, you can do a whole load of things that you could not do. And what it does is it fundamentally solves the problem of getting people from A to B. So in terms of resilience, so the second part of this video, there's lots and lots of things in resilience that are similar to the adaptability. Lots of the the sort of fundamentals I've talked about already still apply. And for me, the resilience piece is understanding where you're heading so your ultimate destination, in this case the top right hand corner, plus understanding the why, the reason, the fundamental reason and the purpose of you doing it. And if you understand those two things, I think it helps you to continue to head towards that goal. And of course what you also need is a positive environment. So in this case, a positive working environment where you have the right culture, you have psychological safety, you have people who are supportive and heading in the right direction and working together to try and achieve a goal. It's about growth mindset as well, and that includes reframing things, including setbacks. So if you look at the path that I've drawn there, it's not linear. It doesn't go directly from the person to the target, to the goal. And that is typical, isn't it? Whenever you've got a project or an activity, very rarely do you just go straight from A to B with no deviation. The bit about resilience is if you understand what that goal is, so where you're heading, and you understand why you're heading there, and it has enough importance, those deviations will not put you off track. They will temporarily, and as you can see, I've drawn the path there. In fact, that bit down the bottom right hand corner is actually going backwards, and sometimes that's how it feels, you're going backwards. But again, if you've got the right motivation, because it's something that's really important, and you understand the fundamental reason you're doing it, and you understand where you're heading, the deviations are just part of the process, but you're still going to get there, and you're still heading in that right direction. And I think the other thing is it's about recognising and celebrating progress. So I've got a Making Progress series as well, with a few videos in that series, and that's because of this point here. Quite often, we're not very good at recognising we've made progress, and making progress is a real motivator. And often, and all too often actually, what we're doing is we're looking forward at the mountain we've still got to climb, rather than looking backwards at how far we've come. And if you do both of those things, you still know where you're heading, you still know what your challenges are, but you can see how much progress you've made, and you can celebrate that, and that will motivate you and your team. So for me, there are lots of other elements to certainly the resilience side, but in a nutshell, that for me is what resilience and adaptability are about. And I'm just going to summarise now. So, adaptability allows us as leaders to respond dynamically to change. And the key there is understanding which bits you need to change, because you've understood the fundamental reason you're doing something. And all the other bits, just ignore them. If it doesn't make any difference to your outcome, and it doesn't make any difference to the motivation of your team, you don't need to adjust and change things. Quite often people do just for the sake of it. But, it's almost like having a laser focus on the target. If the change that's happening has no bearing on where you're heading, ignore it. If it does, though, look at what you need to do, understand the fundamentals, look at first principles, and that will help you solve the problem of what you need to change to get to a better place. And then finally, resilience is about ensuring we maintain stability and focus, linked to the first one, and it allows us to make progress even through difficult times. So again, that wiggly path that you saw, those are things that have thrown you off track, but if you know where you're heading and why you're heading there, you'll just carry on, you will get there anyway. So that's it for this week. I hope that's useful. As you've seen, I've got a few more videos to do in this series. There's definitely some stuff coming up about some of the technology of being a modern leader, and how we need to understand the technology to get business benefit from it. I'm really interested in doing those videos, in fact all of them in this series, and hopefully they will help you become a greater leader. If they do, if you like this, as ever, Just one favour to ask, please. Can you like? Can you subscribe? If you want to comment, that'd be fantastic as well. It costs you nothing to subscribe. It really helps the channel, and that just will encourage me to carry on and create more videos that hopefully are helping you. So that's it. I will see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching.